Well, hello, with gratitude, Matt listeners. It's Matt's older brother, Bill, and we have an exciting episode of With Gratitude Matt here today. We have a fabulous guest. He's an author, he's a law professor, he is an award winning journalist, a man of many hats, but he recently wrote the book, The Power of Gratitude. Our guest is Patrick Garry. Patrick, as I mentioned, authored the book, The Power of Gratitude, charting a path towards a joyous and faith-filled life. Today, Patrick will share some of his family's stories, specifically those of his parents, Michael and Elizabeth Garry. And these stories, I think, will have valuable lessons. And our goal today, and I just want the listeners to really key in on this, is to listen to these stories and learn to be present, understand the lessons in these lives that are explained to you, but look into your own lives and embrace a life of gratitude. So welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Bill. Sure is good to be here with you.
Well, Patrick, I know you're a humble guy. You and I've met before this episode, and but I also think it's important to the listeners to let them know some of your professional accomplishments. You are a professor of law at the University of South Dakota. You're a director of Hageman Center for Legal and Public Policy Research. You earned your doctorate and your Juris Doctor from the University of Minnesota. You've published over 13 nonfiction books and 8 novels, and you've been invited to speak before Congress on many occasions on legal and constitutional matters, and you're a frequent speaker at the Federalist Society, as well as you've won numerous book awards. But I think you wrote, and it's in your in the book. It's on the cover page. With The Power of Gratitude might be the only book that you really felt you were called to write. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. I guess when I decided to write something about it, I thought that really sums it up.
And so Patrick, I mean, in the book, and we'll kind of walk through it a little bit, but kind of just to give the listeners a little bit about your family and the kind of the biography of your family and kind of how this all started between you and your Michael and your mother Elizabeth.
Well, so I grew up in a town called Fairmont. It's in south central Minnesota. It's a small town. My father owned and operated a grain elevator, and my parents raised 8 children. And so we lived in a big house, one of the older houses in town. I think of my mother as it took her 50 years to fix that house up. Um, and it's the house where, all 10 of us and I don't know how many different pets lived there for all those years.
And so, as we have the book here for the listeners to go out and grab off the shelves, and we'll talk about that later. But what really inspired you to write a book on gratitude?
Well, actually, at the time, I had taken a semester off from teaching, and I was doing some volunteer work on a Indian reservation in northern Minnesota. And it was during the winter. It was a harsh winter. I had time available, and I began thinking about. I really began thinking about my parents because I had taken with me some papers of my parents, and I was going through them, and I thought, I'd like to write something about them. And then, as I thought about writing it, I kind of wanted to write it around a theme or a core that really defined my parents. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought gratitude was really the definition of their life and kind of their core identity.
And how did because gratitude is kind of a word of the day, kind of a term that often gets overused. But what is your definition of gratitude? How did you come to, you know, appreciate that?
Yeah, and that's interesting you ask, Bill, like a defined gratitude, because I think it is. It's a word like, well, we know what it is. It's saying thank you. It's being appreciative. But there is something so much deeper than that, than just that sense. And And I think the way I thought about it, I think of gratitude as a way of life rather than just a thank you. So I think oftentimes we, and that includes me, um, think about gratitude as being, being appreciative of a particular benefit or a particular accomplishment we have. But that's just kind of a item by item sense of gratitude versus a life of gratitude. And I really think that what's the definition of gratitude? Maybe it's being, really aware of your unique blessings. It's really knowing who you are, um, and because to know who you are is to really get a sense of what you are grateful for. So it's much more so than good things that happen to you. It's really about who you are, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the and you kinda laid this out quite nicely, and what I want our listeners to kinda key in on are where there are opportunities for you to really learn who you are, and I think you saw that through your parents and some of the adversity that they faced. Is that true? I mean,
Yes, it
and
is.
what
That I think like well, it really was. I never realized it when they were alive, and it wasn't till I wanted to write this kind of memoir about them that I realized. How can I, instead of just writing stories about two people, what is it that they were really all about? What did they try to teach us, and how did they live? And and the whole idea of gratitude, and then from that came all of these different kinds of virtues and traits that we'll touch on later on, in this podcast.
Yeah, and one of 'em I mean, kind of and you wrote about a lot of examples, and I don't wanna I wanna leave something for the readers. But for our listeners here today, one of the things I mean, you grew up in the '70s, right?
Right.
And you grew up in a small town, but that small town was not immune to some of the things that were going on, around the world, and namely the Vietnam War, and there was a local man or young man that served, and you wrote about that, and it seemed to have a big impact on you and kind of help form who you were and help you embrace gratitude. Kind of, if you could walk the listeners through that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think I grew up in a small town, and my parents were very aware of the wider world, and so many people I think that you grow up in a small town, you grow up in a very sheltered environment, and you don't really grab a sense of the outer world. So this part of the book, I really sort of looked at how in a small town, not only do you get a sense of the wider world, sometimes you get even a more intimate sense of the wider world. So you mentioned Vietnam, and Vietnam was a very important subject. You knew about it wherever you lived, but in a small town, if one of the young men goes off to serve in Vietnam and comes back injured, maybe severely injured. Um, there's such an intimacy there. I mean, you knew the person, and the person I talk about was an all-state halfback, an all-state, track star, and then he comes back with an amputated leg, and so you really kind of feel the impact of that war because you knew the person well before, and now you see them, well. You don't just view things on the television screen; they're a part of your life, and I think that really gave a lot of life and vibrancy to our lives growing up, and I still think in many ways, in small towns you can't escape things; they're right there for you. Uh, and maybe in bigger cities, there's ways to, seal yourself off a little bit, but you can't do that in a small town.
Yeah, and kind of shifting a little bit over to your parents, and one of the things that I found really that your father certainly embraced, and I think at times reluctantly, you and your brothers and sisters embraced was the immigrant mentality. So, kind of explain a little bit about that and what that meant to you and help form you.
Yeah, my father always talked about the immigrants and always, that kind of became one of those slogans, among children. Whenever we wanted to poke fun at my father, whenever we wanted to talk about my father, we always talked about immigrants. His grandparents came over from Ireland, uh, and they homesteaded on a farm just outside of Fairmont, Minnesota. So my father was very keenly aware of that, and that really shaped his idea of life. I think that really shaped his sense of who he was, and he had a great respect for, the immigrant mentality because he knew very well. He and I wrote a history of our family, and my father had a great memory and could remember stories, and so it meant a lot to him, the suffering and the pain that people had to go through. You travel across the ocean and travel halfway across the country, then you have to start up, v a whole new life, build a house, plant a farm when there's nothing been planted there before, and, you develop a great respect for people that were able to do that.
And now I will say, I don't want the listeners to get the impression, and I don't think they do, but yeah, there was adversity, but the next topic that you wrote about was joy. So I don't I think those 2 can go hand in hand, and they did in your life. And I kind of feel like, this podcast was just to give you some historical context, was started by my brother, and, I think, um and he spoke about this, was, when he embraced gratitude, he found joy, peace, and a deeper faith. And I think that's consistent with what you wrote about how joy, um, helped, in you realizing gratitude and understanding gratitude. But oftentimes people equate happiness with joy, but there's a difference there, right,
Yeah,
Patrick?
I think very much so, and, so it's interesting. You certainly know about, going through adversity. I guess we all do. One of the reasons I wrote about adversity is I think sometimes, people think, well, if so and so has gratitude, then they maybe didn't have a difficult time in life. Um, but I think sometimes the people who have the most gratitude maybe have the most difficult and challenges. My parents certainly had that. Um, and that's one of the things that I think made me really realize the power of gratitude in their life because they were able to see themselves through these difficult times. Happiness and excitement comes to us because something great happens to us, or we go to a party and it's a lot of fun, or we succeed at something and it's wonderful, and I call that like happiness or excitement, but it's kind of one time events. But a joy is the kind of things where you're joyful even through adversity, or you're joyful like when you get up in the morning, you're joyful before anything happens to you, and you carry that joy through. And so the joy can't be produced by good events that happen from time to time. That joy has to be there like as a foundation. And sometimes the house gets blown about a lot, and sometimes a lot of storms come on it. But if you've got a life of joy, you're going to survive through that.
Right. Well, and I we're not gonna get into all my childhood, but one of the stories, or one of the, um, poems, was in our home, and my father gave it to all of us, all 5 of us when we moved out, was by Charles Swindoll, and it titled Attitude. And dad was always, of the mindset that that was the only thing that you could really control. There's a lot of other things that were outside of your control, but you could control your attitude and how you approached a particular, um, uh, hurdle or challenge, or something. And if you have an attitude of joy, I think that you're going to see that through that lens. And it sounds like that was your experience in your home, and even to today.
Your father and my father must have had some kind of connection because he was saying like that too, and I can't remember it exactly, um, but, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's, and I wish I would have learned that lesson much earlier in life, that you're right, the attitude your life can change if you just have a different attitude towards things, and I'm sure you
Right.
discovered that.
Oh, yeah. Well, uh, yeah, I would say it took me some time to discover it, and there were life lessons along the way. But I certainly do appreciate it, and all kidding aside, having gone through, the adversity and different things, that we all go through. Everybody, we're nobody's immune to this. It certainly gives you some peace and calmness as you go through it, by embracing the joy and everything. So,
Did your
well,
father's, advice on attitude, did it have a much of an effect initially?
I think they were words.
Yeah.
I think that and it was it was a neat thing to be aware of, but I think once you kind of rolled up your sleeves and embraced it, and I know that sounds a little bit odd, but really when you start to live it, you know, and then also you see it in others. I saw it in my brother on his journey, his cancer journey, and as he was called to his heavenly home, I saw that, and there was pain for sure, but there was definitely, beauty, faith, and all of that. And again, everybody's experienced that, but I think what you and I are talking about here today hopefully will inspire others to look into their life and use it as a way to, see the joy, to appreciate this and embrace a lifestyle of gratitude. So, but, no, yeah, thanks for bringing up my dad. Yeah, I'm sure somewhere along the way, they were,
They
connected in
rubbed shoulders.
some there you go. Um, well, service is a big part of this, Patrick, and obviously, you can't be, one of 8 children, mother and father, uh, pillars in the community. You have many stories of service, but how did your parents introduce that to you? And it sounded like it was more organic. It's just part of how you lived.
I think so. My parents, that was just the way they lived. Um, and, now granted, growing up, of course, service became became an unwanted word because service was always there, and we were always part of it, and we knew we were gonna be part of it. In the book, I tell the story that after mass, my parents never left the church very early, and somehow it just seemed as if people would come up to my parents afterwards. They knew that my parents would help them out, um, and they'd, kind of make their requests then, and we'd be watching this train of people come up to my parents, knowing full well that one way or another we were going to be involved in this. Um, and uh, I don't know. It's when I think about their service, I just think that um, I think it was their gratitude that opened them up to it. That they felt so grateful. So many of us, of course, look at what we want to do or what we have to surmount or what we have to try to correct in their life. I think they saw the great gifts that they had, and once you see great gifts, you want to share them. Um, that's what they did. I think of I think of that story of my mother. I don't tell a lot of stories in the book. I just try to tell some that I think really highlight it. And one of the stories about my mother is an annual breakfast they'd put on for certain widows in the parish. And the first time they did that at their house, this woman shows up early. My mother's still trying to get things ready. Somebody shows up early. You know how that goes. It's like, I need to do work, but now I got to halfway entertain this person. So they brought her into the kitchen, sat her down at the table while they're still trying to do it. Before they knew it, this woman who was carrying a bag coming into the house uh, is plucking a chicken. She had brought a chicken in this plastic bag and was plucking it. Um, she was a bit of a different type of person, and she was one of those people who rarely got out, which is why she got invited to this event. And so on my mother's clean kitchen floor, the chicken blood is dripping, and she's pulling out, plucking out the feathers. And I remember my mother. I happened to be there at the time, and she handled it very calmly. I was solicited to get the woman out to the back porch and finish the job out there. Um, but
Oh,
my mom went on to host, I think, 17 or 18 more of those widows' luncheons, and I think most people would have rightly said to their husband, "Okay, I tried. No more of this. No more of having a plucked chicken in my kitchen when I'm about to feed people." But, mom took it in stride, um, I have all kinds of different stories about my parents and how they were sort of able not just to do something, but to go such an extra step and yet never feel as if they'd been burdened, never feel resentful. It was like that next step was a joy. It was a joy for them to do it. I oftentimes didn't share that
and
attitude, but they sure had it.
yeah, and I guess, in writing this book and kind of reflecting on your parents' lives even before they met, but when they met and married and started their family, when did you kinda come, and I don't know if epiphany's too big of a word, when did you come to, realize a lot of these lessons? And I guess you're still to this day looking back at a lot of these events and seeing the lesson in the experience, in the story.
I wish, Bill, I could say that I learned them as I encountered them. I wish I could say that. I really can't say that. I remember the saying, and I don't know who said it, but there's a saying that no man is hero to his valet, which means, I guess, the closer you are to someone, the less you see something special in them. You tend to take them for granted, and likewise, I think. With many things of my parents, I didn't really truly grasp the lessons because, well, this is just how I always grew up in a way. So I didn't see their specialness many times because for me, it just it was like a fixture of life. This is how they were, and I think uh, a lot probably sunk in without me realizing it, but really not until I undertook this book and really studying them, did I try to look at them from a different perspective rather than just as a son, as someone who always knew them, as someone who was as people who were just very, very intimately familiar with me. So, it took, I guess, like most of us, it took something kind of out of the ordinary, and so many times with us, death can do that. Certainly, and I talk about this in the book, the experiences I had at my father's wake um, brought me in contact with people I never knew. I never knew them, and I never knew the connection that they had with my parents, and that was, I think, maybe a real eye opener to me. Um, um, in fact, I met a young woman, never knew her before, and she told me that she gave me the history of how she came in contact with my parents, about how they helped her through a time when her parents were separating. Um, and then she stayed overnight many times at the house, and she told me the bedroom that she stayed in, that was the bedroom I always stayed in whenever I came home. I'm thinking, I'm sharing it with someone I don't even know.
uh So what advice would you have to our listeners in kinda going through that process that you went through, in their own lives? How can they kinda embrace that and look back to their loved ones and their family who are here or who are not here, and kinda open their eyes? And my brother used to always say, "Be present," and I think that's the first step, right?
Yes, I think I'd probably give the same advice, Bill, you'd give when you talked about attitude, like good attitude. It always revolves around something. And on the surface, it sounds very simplistic. And I think with all of us, until we try to live it, it sounds so simplistic and so shallow, we don't even think about it. But once you try to live it and begin grasping it, you just realize that these doors open to you that you never imagined. Gratitude is a simple word. Attitude is a simple word, and yet um, it's kind of like faith. You don't understand it until you actually start living it. And then once you start living it, you realize the depth that is there and how it can how that one trait, one of the things I think I say this in the book is that, if you wanted to host a self-help session about how you could improve your life and live a better life, I think you just focus on gratitude. Because if you discover gratitude and live it, it's going to lead to all of these things: a life of joy, a life of service, the ability to persevere through difficult times, through adverse times, a courage, a freedom from fear, a deeper faith. It'll lead to all of that. Um, and I guess the advice I'd give is um, even though it seems simple, try to focus on it. Try to think every moment you can about what am I grateful here for? When you're afraid of something, what am I grateful for? When you're angry or dejected, what am I grateful for? And I think what you might find is that that's going to lead you to that door will lead you to a little bigger room. And once you're in that room, you'll find another door that'll lead you yet to a bigger room than that, and so forth and so on.
So you kind of and you touched on this, and I do. I mean, obviously, in your home, faith was the cornerstone of uh, this life of gratitude, and they do go in hand in hand, but they are different. And you write about that, and you kind of point out, and for the listeners, um, I'm not going to paraphrase it because you said it so eloquently, but what is the difference between faith and gratitude?
Well, of course, gratitude is an appreciation of who you are and what you've been given, and of course, faith. I always try to think of that definition by Saint Paul. Faith is the realization of the faith is realization of what is hoped for, and I forget that. It's in one of his letters, but here's how I might say it. They are different. What I learned is that gratitude can be the key to faith. And so faith is difficult, as anyone who's tried to live a faithful life. Um, Faith is not how sometimes it's portrayed, like, oh, you just have faith and everything is goes fine and you don't have to think about it. Faith requires a tremendous amount of effort and a tremendous amount of commitment. Um, and how do you get there? How do you get to faith? Of course, it's can be through grace, but one of the way to help you is through gratitude. And if you just start trying to be gratitude, you're trying to be grateful and live a life of gratitude, according to my parents, that may lead you to faith in a way that just a blind desire, like to wake up in the morning and say, I want to have faith. Well, that's going to be difficult. Um, but maybe the path to faith is through gratitude. I always think about that story about the 10 lepers who have been healed. And one healed leper comes back to Jesus and says, and acknowledges it. And the healed leper says, "Thank you." And then Christ answers with, "Your faith has saved you." Well, he never said, "I believed." He just said, "Thank you." And then Christ calls it faith. And I sometimes look at that um, story and I think, well, maybe that lays out for us a path that be grateful, and then with that will come a deeper faith.
Wow, that's it. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that's a powerful, biblical and well known example. But you really brought it to light. Um, my brother would always, and he said this, and I guess kind of get taking a step back. A lot of his words, I would hear them, and yeah, I understood. I thought I understood what they meant, but he would always say, um, he wanted to remind us to find the courage to be grateful, no matter how powerful what the storm was. And you mentioned it earlier that by embracing gratitude, you, it can alleviate your fears. And where did you see that in your life?
Sure. Well, this was at a time, so talk about like adversity that my parents suffered. Um, when I was in high school, our junior high school burned down, and so we had to really fit the junior and senior high schools together in one building. We went to what was called the split shift. The seniors went from 6 in the morning to noon, and then the junior high went from 1 till 7 at night. And so I was on the 6 to 12 shift, and we had a football game in like the latter part of the afternoon. I went home, wandered upstairs, fell asleep for a nap, and overslept. And we lived in a big 3-story house, and so once you're up on the third floor, you can't hear much. I wake up. Of course, it's late. My mom's there. And I'm thinking, oh, let's just crawl into a hole and forget about this, forget about ever playing football again. And my mom says, no, we're going. And she takes me to the high school. So I go in. The equipment's already been locked up, but I find some practice jerseys to put on. And then the football field is several blocks away. She gives me a ride to the football field. I want to go in the back gate, but it's locked. So I have to climb over this barbed wire fence in my football uniform. Luckily, it was a practice jersey without my name on it. Luckily, I had a helmet on so nobody could see me. Of course, kids are in the stands turning around saying, look, look, that kid climbing over the fence. I climb over the fence. But my mom is telling me, face it now. Face it now. And so I run around the end. I present myself to the coach. He's disgusted with me. I sit on the bench for the rest of the game, but it was over then. And
Right.
and in fact, I provided a subject for funny stories for football banquets in years to come. Uh, but I guess that's something that my mom really did teach me is, as bad as it might be, face it right now, and you'll never have to revisit again. Otherwise, that event will haunt you for the rest of your life. And what do they say? Heroes die once, and cowards die 1,000 deaths, and that's about it. And my mom was always able to sort of see past the fear, and that was it. Her
Right.
gratitude let her see past the fear and see that this fear is nothing. This event is okay. You'll easily get over this.
So, so you got into, so you got into academics. You were a law professor, and at some point you decide, I'm going to start to be an author. I'm going to start to write. I'm going to, and I guess that's part of the academic
Right?
life, right? I mean, you publish, and I think your mom also taught you when it came time to publish, and you had to come up with an index, right? And I thought that that was an amazing story. I mean, and you share it with the listeners, and the courage that she showed and helping you, and then now you've published, you're award-winning author, rest is history. But I
Yeah,
thought
well,
that
sure.
was
It's the
really cool.
first book I ever did, and the publisher wanted an index. I didn't know how to do an index. I didn't know how you would begin, looking at this whole book and organizing all these terms and doing everything like this. And my mom offered to do it. And she set up a desk and she worked at it every day. And, she produced this index. She'd never done it either, but she wasn't afraid of doing it. She wasn't afraid of undertaking it. She wasn't afraid of learning it. I was afraid of it, and she offered to do it, and I'm thinking, well, hallelujah. Uh, and later on, after she died, I found the manuscript in a drawer of the desk she used, and it was a very powerful discovery, a very powerful memory of how um, uh, she undertook this for me to do this for me with absolutely no reservation, no fear whatsoever. I think that's and I can respect that because, like I said, I wrote the book, but I had no idea how to do an index, no idea whatsoever.
Well, and I think for the listeners, that's, you have to take that, using your words earlier, leap of faith but at all, if it's grounded in gratitude, it does, and I'm going to borrow your word again, the courage to do it. And that's what your mom showed you. And so I'm sure in your life, and as you're educating students and you're challenging them, you're urging them to embrace the courage, and because being a law student can be pretty rigorous. It can be pretty demanding, and but if they face the fear, um, it sometimes it usually isn't as daunting as it
It it
seemed
almost
before.
it
Our
almost
fears
never
are greater.
is it? It almost never is, and my parents seem to my parents seem to grasp that, and both of them in terms of that they would not have the type of fear that oftentimes I would have, and I can see that now.
Right. Well, I and I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but you write a little bit about it, but you've talked about it in other forums. You're an educator, but you get to so you get to stay connected to um, students and younger people. And what have you kind of observed um, in society? And I think your father was the one, and it was one of the things that concerned him was that, we weren't teaching uh, people to embrace gratitude. But what have you seen in your through your eyes and the students
Let
and your
me you
community?
just reminded me, Bill, so before I get that, I wanna just tell a little bit of a story about my father because, uh, he was always on a mission in a way. I think this great gratitude gave he's always on a mission, and well, in his later years, he didn't have the ability to do a lot of physical activity, and he still wanted to be on a mission. And so he began writing. He wrote essays for the local paper. The essays were always very uplifting. I would make fun of him, because, here he was writing for a newspaper, and of course, here I was trying to write a book, okay? But you know what? My father's readership was a lot bigger than mine was. And his readership was a lot more impacted by what he did because he inspired so many people. When one of his essays came out, he would write about patriotism and he would write about gratitude and he would write about those very important things in life. And for days after something came out, people would come up to him and they'd call him or they'd come up to him and talk to him. So he saw kind of a mission there about spreading a particular message. He also started writing letters to people. He couldn't visit them, but he wrote them letters when they were undergoing something difficult. And his hand got a little shakier, so what I'd have to do is rewrite the letter for him, um, I got impatient with that at times, and I thought, I don't know, what's the point here? And he always invited people at the end of the letter to come visit him and talk to him, um, which I, of course, thought, "Nobody's gonna do that." Well, they did it. And in one of them, again, I talked about finding my mother's, manuscript in the drawer. The day my father died, before a public announcement had gone out, I was at the house and the doorbell rang, and there, standing at the door, was one of the people who had received a letter, holding my father's letter, and that person was coming to talk to my father, as many other people as did before that.
Right. So your father had written that days
Days
before
before,
he
yeah,
passed.
he passed, and the person got the letter, and
Oh,
they
that
said, "Yeah, I'm gonna go talk to him." Yeah.
man, that's amazing. Wow. Well, just to kind of give you a little uh, history and indulge me for a minute. So my father was an obstetrician gynecologist, and as far as letters, there are two things that I can remember, and they just made such an impact on me. And I've always, we talked about this before we got online, but about the power of a handwritten note, and that my parents taught me that, but dad is an OB-GYN. When a woman would give birth, he would always take out his physical, now it's all electronic, but he'd take out his physical script sheet and he'd write a prescription
Mm.
to the father. And it would said, dad, new dad, uh, you are to provide your child with a home, shelter, comfort, and you're to provide your family, your wife, with love, hope, and faith. And he put that on the script and gave it to the dad, and it was just kind of a neat thing. And when he passed, we had heard that in his life, but we'd also heard it, and still hear it. And I guess that's one of the things that I do enjoy hearing those stories, and I'm sure you do too, about your father and about your parents. So
That's a
it's
great
pretty
story,
cool,
Bill. I
pretty
mean,
pretty
that's
cool.
what an admirable man your father was.
Well, you're not supposed to meet your heroes, but I live with mine, so and it was raised by him. So, and my mother too. I mean, she, there was a team as your parents were too. So, I just want the listeners to kind of not. This isn't about you know uh, Pat's mom and dad or Bill's mom and dad. This is about their lives, and they can see and draw from what their parents have taught them, what their family has taught them, and I think it's powerful and help move them towards gratitude. So, um, I think that so
That's
we were gonna kinda and by the way, that was great to hear about your father. My dad always said education is a journey of a lifetime, and I think yours did your dad did too. So, trying to be a teacher in those letters, but it also showed compassion and love and empathy. Um, but your dad wrote or you wrote in the book, but you're quoting your father, according to my dad, gratitude gives people the vigor to face struggles and make sacrifices. It gives strength to a nation. I mean, that you talked about his patriotism. And then he was quoted as saying, I fear we are teaching young people the wrong lesson. I fear we are teaching people not to be grateful. Now, I think I get that, and I don't disagree with your dad, but I do see a little bit of a movement, your book, this podcast, many others, gratitude's being talked about more, and it's on the forefront. And kind of what have you seen? I mean, you wrote this book and you published it, I believe, in 22. What have you seen since then?
Bill, I think it actually is. I wasn't aware of it before I wrote the book, and maybe just because I wasn't so attuned to it. But ever since writing the book, I've had people approach me, people like yourselves. It almost seems as if there's a kind of gratitude movement. So, on one instance, maybe several years ago, I would have said, I don't know that we're living in a society of much gratitude, but it's certainly out there. And I think people are yearning for it. In a way, I don't know, perhaps there's a kind of, cultural revival in a sense in many different areas. And I think gratitude is an important area because I think you can't have any of the other virtues in life if you don't have gratitude. You just can't. So I think a real sign of hopefulness is the awareness, the growing awareness of gratitude that I see all around me.
That's encouraging, and also kind of in keeping with our optimism and having a joyful uh, mindset. Um, you know, one of the things, and you didn't really write about this, but I listened to another one of your podcasts, uh, and you talked about your parents and how um, embracing embracing this uh, in their passing, you've offered intercessions to them, and I thought that that was really powerful, um, because they are here. They're just not here in their earthly bodies, and how has that helped you embrace a life of gratitude with loved ones that you've lost?
Well, I think it keeps you connected to them. And to be connected to them is to realize that all that you've been given, all that has been bequeathed to you in life. And I think without realizing, family and the past and all of those previous generations that have sort of, you know, worked and sacrificed in a way willingly so that you could have the life that you have. um, I think that's very important. My father used to always say that he prayed for intercessions from his parents and his deceased relatives all the time, and he really felt that they helped him through. Um, and maybe I kind of picked that up from him, because they're still with us, and all the lessons they have taught us, they're still with us. We just need to keep discovering them and keep living by them.
Right. I think that's a great lesson, and a great message. Um, well, Patrick, I don't want to take all of your time, and you've done an amazing job of kind of walking us through your book, and I really encourage the listeners to go out, um, and buy it and read it. But but not only just read it, but I think it's an exercise, and I think if you live it, it's just going to make your life more full, rich. It's going to bring you peace. It's going to bring you a great appreciation for everything, the struggles and the lessons that are in those, and everything that we experience in life. But before we cut out here, is there? I don't know if there's any other advice that you'd want to share with the listeners while you have an opportunity to do so.
Bill, what you talking about just there, I think to myself, every semester when I end my classes, the last lecture I give really is not about the class material at all. It's always about, if I had a life lesson to give you, here's the life lesson. And it is a lesson about gratitude. And it's a lesson that I think gratitude, I said it before, gratitude leads to everything else, and you can't have anything else if you don't have gratitude. It's that first step. It's not something you can skip over in life. It's what'll enable you to live the life that you want to live, the life to live the life that you're meant to be. And when I give this message to students, and incidentally, I'll give you another positive message. The students I teach, I'm very fortunate and blessed to be a teacher, because the older I get, the more they keep me in touch with the greatness of life and an optimism that I don't think I'd have if I didn't have them. Um, and what I do is I play a song, "Count Your Blessings." It's an Irving Berlin song, and I just play this song. There's a video recording of it, of these two women, a piano player and a singer, and they do it. And it's a very touching song, and that's kind of my way of depicting gratitude. And I talk to them about that, and so that's what I do with all my students. And if I could give my own advice to anyone out there, I'd say gratitude isn't just a thank you note. It's a way of life, and it could lead to a very fine life.
Wow, that's a powerful visual. I think I can see Rosemary Clooney and singing in White Christmas with Bing Crosby.
You got it.
Think those were the 2 that sang it. That was that's a family favorite, around the holidays, and we say, kinda humming that tune around, but that's great. I'm so glad that you do that for your students, and, I'm sure they, really, buy into that and appreciate it. Um, so in closing, my brother always reminded us to do 3 things, to live life to the fullest, and one was to find something that they were grateful for, regardless of how powerful the storm is. Uh, Truly be present with those that you are with, and then also pay attention to what you're feeding your mind, your body, and your soul. Again, a huge thank you to our guest, Patrick Garry. To our listeners, remember, uh, I encourage you to buy and read and live the words that Patrick has written here, The Power of Gratitude. Um, Go to our website, withgratitudematt.com, and follow us. And for messages, for announcements, and important news, with Gratitude Matt listeners, until the next time, find the courage to be grateful. Godspeed, my friends.